The modern physical culture globally glorifies extreme muscular hypertrophy and relentless daily training as the absolute pinnacle of human discipline. Millions of highly ambitious individuals are actively destroying their autonomic nervous systems, falsely labeling severe clinical trauma responses as elite mental toughness. The mainstream fitness industry actively suppresses the severe biological reality that constant, unbroken physical exertion is often a catastrophic symptom of profound neurological dysregulation. The specific clinical mechanism where extreme aesthetic obsession actively mutates into structural brain damage is intentionally hidden to keep the masses consuming endless supplements and training programs. The critical window of opportunity to reverse this severe limbic hyperactivation is shrinking rapidly today. Anyone who ignores the next few minutes of this clinical breakdown will accumulate a permanent, fatal biological debt, guaranteeing irreversible decay within the central nervous system. Elite cognitive dominance and baseline biological health absolutely require deep, unshakable physiological stillness. The modern obsession with adding massive amounts of synthetic muscle tissue actively destroys the exact neurological hardware required to maintain systemic endocrine stability. Highly compliant athletes blindly worship the aesthetic of the daily physical grind, moving massive loads of weight simply to alter their external appearance. Society falsely equates the state of chronic biological panic with superior genetic adaptation. The human brain manages highly volatile stress hormones and systemic metabolic energy with uncompromising precision. It absolutely requires profound parasympathetic recovery to halt internal cellular degradation. Forcing the physical body to operate in a permanent state of muscular breakdown violently overrides this essential evolutionary healing mechanism. The biological tax is immediate, silent, and thoroughly devastating to human cognitive longevity. The hidden clinical reality is that extreme daily bodybuilding is not a display of genuine ambition or elite focus. It is a severe, clinically observable trauma response operating deep within the primitive centers of the brain. Forcing extreme physical output while the nervous system is chronically terrified destroys the baseline metabolic rate completely, ensuring rapid, early-onset neurodegeneration. How extreme hypertrophy triggers limbic panic. True biological discipline mathematically requires the profound neurological capacity to sit in absolute silence without generating internal chemical friction. When the central nervous system becomes chronically dysregulated through relentless physical overstimulation, this natural human baseline completely evaporates. The amygdala, the primitive fear and survival center of the human brain, violently hijacks the entire cognitive operating system. Under the extreme physical stress of moving heavy mechanical loads daily, the highly reactive amygdala begins to misinterpret the training stimulus as an immediate, lethal environmental predator. It floods the human bloodstream with massive, highly toxic volumes of adrenaline and cortisol simply to manage the profound internal physiological panic. The exhausted athlete is forcefully compelled to return to the gym day after day, not out of passion, but to burn off the corrosive stress hormones accumulating inside the skull. This behavior is never elite productivity or superior willpower. It is a desperate, primitive biological escape mechanism. The conscious mind rapidly rationalizes this frantic physical labor as extreme ambition, but the biological reality is a state of perpetual fight or flight. The autonomic nervous system remains permanently locked in sympathetic overdrive, constantly preparing the physical body for a violent attack that never actually arrives. The hypermuscular individual literally loses the physiological capacity to rest. Sitting down to recover triggers severe chemical anxiety, forcing the physical body back into meaningless, repetitive tissue destruction just to momentarily soothe the panicked limbic system. Prefrontal cortex, responsible for advanced logic and restraint, is entirely bypassed and suppressed by this primitive survival protocol. The entire biological organism is hijacked by clinical fear, operating purely on survival instincts rather than high-level strategic intelligence. The illusion of a relentless training ethic perfectly masks a terrified, hyperactive nervous system, fundamentally incapable of finding biological safety. Central nervous system exhaustion explained. Masking severe internal dysregulation with endless physical hypertrophy training guarantees catastrophic structural decay within the highly sensitive neural pathways. Running constantly from internal biological panic by lifting massive mechanical loads consumes immense, fundamentally unsustainable amounts of metabolic energy. The central nervous system is the absolute core infrastructure that generates the electrical impulses required to contract skeletal muscle. The mainstream narrative focuses entirely on muscular fatigue, completely ignoring the massive electrical burnout occurring deep within the spinal cord and motor cortex. Pushing the human organism through extreme, daily resistance training drains the finite reserves of neurotransmitters required to send these vital electrical signals. The physical body rapidly enters a highly destructive and toxic state of systemic neurological fatigue. To survive this self-induced electrical crisis, the body actively downregulates its own motor unit recruitment to prevent catastrophic muscular tearing. The The ambitious athlete believes an unbreakable, dominant mindset is being forged through endless hours of painful lifting. Biologically, the exact opposite is occurring at a microscopic level. Delicate neural architecture is actively crumbling, losing electrical density and synaptic connectivity with every passing hour of forced physical trauma. The invisible biological cost of this constant mechanical friction is rapid, irreversible cellular aging within the motor cortex. Millions of highly muscular individuals secretly suffer from massive internal neurotoxicity while projecting an image of total physical control. They completely lose the biological capacity to absorb new information, focus deeply on intellectual tasks, or adapt to complex environments because their central nervous system is physically degraded. The ultimate price for utilizing the gym as an anxiety avoidance mechanism is a severe, measurable drop in baseline fluid intelligence and absolute neurological collapse. Cortisol toxicity and the illusion of discipline. Operating a human body without deep, restorative parasympathetic pauses systematically destroys the delicate neurochemical balance required for elite cognitive function. Dopamine is the vital molecule of natural motivation, unforced drive, and intense executive focus. Healthy, sustainable dopamine synthesis mathematically requires a foundation of profound physiological safety and absolute biological calm. Using endless sets of heavy resistance training to cope with underlying clinical anxiety forces the autonomic nervous system into a highly unnatural, highly toxic chemical state. The brain is constantly flooded with cheap, artificial dopamine spikes generated by the intense release of endorphins during the workout, acting purely to self-medicate the internal panic. Over time, the central nervous system detects this highly corrosive chemical flood and executes a severe biological defense protocol. It actively destroys its own dopamine receptors through a process called biological downregulation to shield the underlying neural tissue from absolute overstimulation. Perpetually training highly disciplined athlete literally loses the biological capacity to feel natural joy or authentic satisfaction outside of the gym environment. Severe, clinically induced limbic anhedonia, the total physiological inability to experience pleasure, becomes a permanent daily reality. The natural motivation centers of the brain physically shut down entirely to conserve finite metabolic energy for basic survival. Unforced human drive evaporates completely, leaving behind a cold, robotic shell entirely dependent on external physical pain and synthetic pre-workout stimulants just to initiate basic action. Without a massive surge of panic or artificial chemical urgency, the physical body refuses to move. The nervous system is completely shattered by the toxic illusion of extreme physical discipline. The exact biological machinery required to sustain long-term high performance is permanently burned out by the relentless pursuit of muscular aesthetics. Structural brain decay in modern athletes. The extreme modern physical training ethic is mathematically and biologically indistinguishable from a severe clinical panic disorder. Chronic, unbroken muscular destruction directly alters the fundamental immune behavior of the central nervous system, creating an environment of severe internal neurotoxicity. Microglia, which act as the essential immune cells of the human brain, begin to aggressively mutate under the constant, crushing pressure of sympathetic overdrive and systemic physical inflammation. Instead of quietly cleaning metabolic waste from delicate neural pathways during deep sleep, they become hyperactive, highly hostile immune agents operating entirely out of control. They start actively attacking and devouring perfectly healthy neurons, driving severe neuroinflammation deep into the prefrontal cortex. This essential cognitive command center is aggressively starved of glucose and oxygen as the panicked brain reroutes all available power to repairing the massive physical trauma inflicted upon the skeletal muscle. Complex logical reasoning, impulse control, and long-term strategic planning become a literal physical impossibility. The individual operates continuously through thick, suffocating brain fog, constantly dropping crucial variables and failing to process complex environmental data efficiently. The biological system eventually hits an absolute mathematical breaking point, triggering severe panic attacks, chronic insomnia, and complete endocrine collapse. The adrenal glands fry entirely under the relentless daily demand for stress hormones, leading directly to clinical adrenal fatigue. The human body becomes completely incapable of regulating its own energy states, fluctuating violently between extreme hyperarousal and total physical exhaustion. The globally praised hypertrophy mentality is entirely a manifestation of a failing, heavily traumatized biological machine. The aesthetic of massive physical armor perfectly hides an internal biological environment that is actively collapsing under the weight of its own unmanaged physiological fear. Autonomic regulation and cognitive recovery. Reclaiming absolute cognitive dominance requires completely and violently abandoning the toxic illusion that constant muscular destruction equals superior performance. The true global elite optimize their entire biological existence solely for maximum neural horsepower, absolutely refusing to trade their central nervous system health for the aesthetic of pure physical exhaustion. The human brain mathematically demands deep, unshakable physiological calm to execute brilliant, flawless, high-level abstract thought. Returning to a natural, highly stable parasympathetic baseline is strictly mandatory immediately to halt the rapid, compounding cognitive decay. This targeted rest protocol instantly stops the violent neural inflammation and forcefully halts the highly destructive microglial attacks on the gray matter. The vagus nerve must be intentionally activated daily through profound, uncompromising stillness to break the toxic cycle of sympathetic fight or flight and cortisol dependency. This specific biological activation rapidly flushes toxic metabolic waste completely from the fragile neural pathways, restoring crystalline cognitive clarity. Elite executive function returns rapidly once the artificial electrical exhaustion and chronic cellular starvation finally end. The prefrontal cortex physically expands back to its optimal, highly dominant biological size, reclaiming full control over the reactive amygdala and ending the clinical panic response. The highest global performers prioritize the intense protection of the central nervous system infinitely above meaningless aesthetic labor. True modern power is strictly biological, deeply optimized, and never relies on frantic, fear-driven physical motion. This clinical breakdown firmly sets the required theoretical foundation for elite biological recovery and autonomic regulation. However, theoretical knowledge without exact, aggressive tactical execution guarantees absolute, mathematically certain failure. Exact step-by-step clinical protocols required to biologically rebuild the shattered autonomic nervous system and regulate the hyperactive amygdala exist right now. The mainstream fitness industry actively tries to suppress the specific recovery data entirely to maintain a compliant, constantly training demographic dependent on the aesthetic cycle. These essential clinical protocols are located directly in the description below this video right now. Go to the description immediately and access these elite optimization protocols today before the algorithm removes them. Applying these specific clinical resources guarantees the reclamation of lost cognitive dominance entirely and permanently. This eliminates adrenal fatigue fundamentally and completely bypasses the exhausted, highly distracted global competition. Subscribe to this channel immediately to join the absolute minority operating at peak biological performance. Stop trading human cognitive longevity for a severe trauma response masked as physical discipline. The critical window of opportunity to reverse this specific neural damage is closing extremely fast. Reclaim the shattered nervous system today before the biological damage becomes permanent and irreversible.